Hi, my name is Joshua and this is my artifact for CT4 FOMod. For this project, I decided to recreate my own PC on a 1:1 scale in 3ds Max. This video will be split into a number of sections, looking at my planning, as well as the implementation of methods, the problems I encountered, and their solutions. I will also be critically reflecting on my performance during this project, considering my strengths, weaknesses, and areas of future development. Within this, I'll discuss my theory and quiz reflections and how they helped with the development of this model. Before starting this project, I first had to plan my methods. Firstly, I took images of my PC and all the components inside, making sure I had every angle possible so I could reference it later on. I wanted to start by creating the case first, and then proceed on to make the hardware inside so everything was to scale. I researched the official websites for each component of my PC, listing all their dimensions, ensuring that when I was to create the model, everything would be on a 1:1 scale. I then made a basic prototype of the model to see how possible the task was and what I would need to take into consideration when making my actual artifact. I planned to use poly editing throughout the whole project, as the PC is geometric with very few curves. However, this was especially useful when creating a GPU, as it would allow me to use tools such as extrusion, plane slicing, and beveling to produce a complex structure. I decided I was going to use lofting to create the cables and water pipes on my AIO cooler. As this would allow me to run a shape across an entire path, I felt this would be the most efficient technique. I would use NURBS to replicate the smooth curves on the fan blades, and then use animations to rotate them, with flyover cameras to capture the video. On top of this, I know I was going to use a combination of union and difference booleans to help when creating complex objects such as supports on the backside of the case. Finally, I decided I was going to use splines to create complex logos for the case, GPU, RAM and AIO by turning them into poly-edited objects and extruding them. I used poly editing throughout most of this project. As I said earlier, my PC is geometric and doesn't have many curves. This made it an ideal method for a large part of this model, such as the shape of the case, GPU and a variety of other objects which make up this computer. I didn't have many issues with this, apart from the fact that I would sometimes spend too much time on one object trying to make it perfect. This is something I'd like to improve on in the future, as I want to be able to balance my attention to detail with the speed at which I can create models like this. I decided to use lofting to create the cables and pipes, as I felt this was the most efficient method. Using this, I was able to make a circle that followed an exact path, creating a smooth and realistic representations of the ones I have in my PC. When using lofting, a problem that occurred was how time-consuming moving every vertex of the path was, while still trying to make it look natural with the other parts of the computer. On top of this, there was a challenge in recreating the bends of the pipes to rest on the GPU, so it looked as close to the original as possible. There was some disorientation with the angles I was observing the path from, as from one direction the pipes would look correct, but then when I moved around in world space they would look out of place and wouldn't line up correctly. A solution to these issues was trial and error. I'd create the path to the best of my ability, then loft a circle across it. I would then see where the pipe and cables were positioned and adjust the thickness of the pipe, or move the vertexes to make them as smooth and natural as possible. I decided to use NURBS to create a smooth curve on the fan blade, as I felt doing this would produce the most accurate results as opposed to making it with polyedit, which uses polygons instead, making the outside slightly more jagged. An issue occurred when the NURBS surface was manipulated to the shape I wanted, as it left a back face invisible, meaning you could see straight through it from one side. I also had to keep readjusting the vertexes, as sometimes they'd be positioned too close together, causing the lighting to bug and making the blades look unsmoothed. Originally, my solution was to try and convert the NURBS surface into an editable poly after I'd made my shape, and create a new face on the underside of the blade. However, this wouldn't work due to the complexity of the curve. I then did some research on backface culling and found out there was a setting I could turn off which stopped the object from deleting the backface. I used animations to make the fan blade spin on both the case and the GPU, as these were the only parts that moved. I also used them to create flyover cameras, showing off the model at the end. When reflecting back on the animations, a problem I had was when I began rotating the fans, each blade would move individually in their local space as opposed to one object in their world space. This created this weird movement. To resolve this, I had to use a union boolean to attach the fan blades to each other, creating two new objects, the fan blade and the base of the fan itself. This fixed part of the issue, allowing the fan blades to spin as one. However, this caused another problem where, due to the fan blades being slotted into the base at slightly different amounts, when the fan spun, the blades would sometimes look like they had detached from the base. To resolve this issue, I had to delete all the blades but one and readjust the NURBS vertexes so that it lined up with the base correctly. I then replicated the fan blades and made sure to take care when positioning them around the base of the fan. The next step was to connect them together using a union boolean. Whilst this solved the issue, one more appeared, as for some reason the fan blade's Y origin had been slightly shifted, so when a blade spun they would rotate slightly on the Y axis, causing this weird effect. To resolve this final issue, I simply attached the fan blades to the base of the fan itself, which reset their origin to that of the bases, meaning that it would only rotate along the X axis. I used booleans throughout this project a lot, as they would allow me to create complex objects by combining and subtracting two other objects from each other. This is apparent with the ports and vents, where I used union and difference booleans to cut specific parts out and attach existing objects together. An issue I would have with booleans was when I was trying to make multiple holes for the vents all at the same time. This would cause the software to crash as there was too much to process all at once. To originally resolve this, I made multiple cylinders and connected them together using a union boolean. I would then use these to cut into a smaller surface. With these new objects, I was able to replicate these smaller surfaces, joining them together to make the vents as one big object. This slightly resolved the issue, but it was still inefficient, as there was a chance a crash could still occur if I did something too quick or there were too many objects to replicate. This was also very time consuming. To make a more viable solution, I decided to use NURBS surfaces, cutting out circles using the CV on Surf tool, which caused no issues and still produced the same results. Overall, I'm very pleased with the way my final artifact turned out, as it's how I envisioned it from the beginning, showing a high level of detail and accuracy with its 1:1 scale. I enjoyed being able to showcase it in a video capturing every aspect of the techniques I used. When it came to poly editing, one of my strengths is being able to assess parts of a model and which tools need to be used to create that object. I also have a high level skill set when creating geometric models like this. This was useful for the project throughout, and as I mentioned earlier, specifically on the GPU. However, something I need to work on is producing the same results quicker, instead of staying on one object for a long period of time, both for poly edited objects and lofted objects such as the cabling. NURBS and curves are my weakest area when it comes to 3D modelling, so in the future I'd like to experiment more with the tools that NURBS surfaces provide, allowing me to create much smoother objects. This is apparent in this artifact, as I feel I could have made the fan blade slightly smoother on the surface. On the contrary, animation is one of my strongest areas. I'm experienced in creating focus points for the viewer and producing unique camera paths which present multiple parts of an object through the animation. I'm good at making animations look realistic, such as the fan, along with a high level of detail which produces a quality finish. However, this is also an area of development for me, as I need to balance my attention to detail with time constraints and deadlines, or possibly learn to work faster in all of these techniques, whilst keeping the same standard of quality, such as when I created the intricate circuitry on the motherboard. My method was to complete the quizzes once before I did the theory, to get an idea of the knowledge I already had. This was helpful as it showed me my weakest areas, such as NURBS, and enabled me to fill in these gaps by studying the theory presentations and completing the workshops. I then re-attempted the quizzes afterwards to solidify my learning and ensure I improved my scores. As a result, my score improved greatly and I achieved full marks on every quiz. This new learning assisted me when creating my model, as I knew the theory behind what I was doing in greater detail, which in turn helped my ability to problem solve. I found the theory presentations on NURBS and mathematical curves especially useful, as this was my greatest area of development. Even though I didn't use this in my artifact, I also valued learning about L systems and would like to look into this further in my future projects. Finally, here's my PC showcase.